As darkness literally enfolds us this time of year, many of us feel the effects of it. Our circadian rhythms work in overdrive to readjust. However, sometimes our bodies respond especially negatively to the increased darkness. Seasonal affective disorder most often impacts folks around this time of year, leading to increases in depression symptoms, such as people feeling down or sad most of the day, nearly every day. These symptoms can last for 4 to 5 months, and likely at least 10 million people experience this in the United States alone. Paradoxically, the holidays can be an especially dark time of year. We sit at tables with loved ones, and we are confronted with newly open seats. We remember what was and what is no more. Thanksgiving is one of the holidays especially associated with conflict. Many of us try to get in and get out with as little bloodshed as possible. But that can be difficult, and it's getting more difficult as political tensions rise, as amicable discourse screeches to a halt. We know darkness. We feel it in our bodies. We also know and feel hopelessness in our bodies. During the rise of Nazi Germany, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote about the idea of cheap grace. He talked about it this way: cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate. Comparably, I think we can get sucked into the idea of cheap hope. Cheap hope thrives when our privilege drowns out the needs of our neighbors. Cheap hope can be commodified, stacked high in exorbitant gifts, and sought after through trends and status symbols. Cheap hope can provide temporary comfort, especially when the world is crumbling, but cheap hope doesn't last. A costly form of hope acknowledges the darkness and refuses to settle for shallow answers. Costly hope is hope that believes despair will not be the final word, and it ushers us into movement on behalf of those around us. Henry Nouwen talks about this kind of hope when he says, hope is willing to leave unanswered questions unanswered and unknown futures unknown. Hope makes you see God's guiding hand, not only in the gentle and pleasant moments, but also in the shadows of disappointment and darkness. In John chapter 1, we encounter the true source of our hope. This is one of the densest and most theologically rich passages surrounding the identity of Christ in the entire biblical account. So much of our Christology, or our understanding of who Jesus is, comes from these verses. Jesus was with God in the beginning. Jesus is the Word. And Jesus is life, and Jesus' life is the light of all people. Jesus' incarnation made it so the darkness could not overcome the light. The Gospel of John starts with this introduction as a way of laying out everything else that's going to be said in the coming chapters. This passage talks of Jesus' life and ministry as ushering in a new creation and drawing believers into a new relationship with God. Our new relationship with God gives room for all of us to participate in the presence of God together. We find costly hope when we consider Jesus' role in the creation of life. John 1:1 certainly harkens back to Genesis when it repeats that phrase, "in the beginning." Jesus was present, is present, and always will be. And Jesus' presence brings us life and light. Many of you may know this, but I recently adopted a 10-month-old puppy named Biscuit. The best thing she has done for me over these last few months is bring life into my home. She has reframed my perspective, and her presence grounds me. Even as she demolished my favorite pair of shoes and made quite a few messes for me to clean up, I find myself laughing and existing in a different kind of way. On a very small scale, the entrance of this puppy into my life has brought life and light to me, and I'm grateful for her. On a vastly larger scale, the writer of John tells us that the work of the triune God in creation brought life and light. And this life and light give us reason to believe and hope. The triune God is still in the business of creating, and the triune God is also continuing in the business of shining amid darkness. Jesus' presence in the beginning matters. Nothing has come into being without Jesus being part of it. In this time of Advent, we are celebrating the incarnation of Jesus. I like to say this is Jesus coming in close. And this closeness might be the thing about faith that has sustained me more than anything else. We believe in a God who did not watch from a distance forever, because Jesus came in close. Jesus knew where things stood. Jesus had been present all along. And Jesus has always been, but Jesus came to a particular people in a particular place at a particular time. Jesus tabernacled with us. Looking at different translations of verse 14 can be really helpful in helping us understand. The First Nations version of the Bible says, Jesus became a flesh and blood human being and pitched his sacred tent among us, living as one of us. The Message version says, Jesus moved into the neighborhood. What does it mean for you to live in a neighborhood? This concept has certainly changed over time and generations. Pew Research Center actually says that only about 26% of people these days would say that they know most of their neighbors. And less people report truly trusting their neighbors these days than ever before. But Jesus came to our neighborhood and invited us to belong fully in our neighborhood as siblings with one another and as children of God. That feels hopeful. But our neighborhoods are not safe for everyone. We're not so good at making sure of that. When I moved from my previous neighborhood in Virginia to a new one in Texas, I had a couple of ideas, assumptions, expectations, you would say, of what my life in Texas would look like. I figured I would learn to appreciate barbecue more. Check. I was positive that Texas summers were not going to be fun. Also check. And I figured I would use Spanish. I would speak in Spanish more frequently. In middle school, high school, and college, I took Spanish classes consistently. And I assumed that opportunities to speak with people who primarily or solely spoke Spanish would be greater in Texas than where I'm from in Virginia. Surprisingly, though, I really haven't used my Spanish at all until recently. As I reflect, I'm realizing much of this reality came about because of my choices. I chose to stick with people who are like me. I chose to self-select comfort. I didn't seek out opportunities to go to the border as I thought I would. And honestly, I thought I would worship in Spanish-speaking spaces, and that didn't happen. And I really wanted to spend time in spaces where English was not the sole method of communication, but that really didn't happen. However, embedded in my work as a pastor in Dallas, Texas these days, is the sacred opportunity to watch and witness the suffering of vulnerable people being harmed by political decisions. And for many of these people, English is not their primary language. I have seen fear, desperation, and hopelessness in the eyes of mothers and grandfathers and law-abiding people doing anything and everything to keep their families together as they face threats of inhumane detainment and deportation. Talk about unanswered questions, unknown futures, and darkness. I've been confronted by my privilege once again because I realize that I still have the choice not to be present. The world is crumbling for so many of my neighbors, and I can easily avoid the discomfort while choosing to continue in my privileged reality. And most days, I make the cheap choice of not even recognizing it. We all make cheap choices. But Jesus made a costly choice. Jesus came in close to a world full of people who came into being through him, and he was rejected. His arrival in the neighborhood was met with pain, violence, grief, anger, and death. And Jesus still chose to come in close. Jesus came in flesh, and in his flesh, he did life differently. He taught us to go and do likewise. Costly hope recognizes the love that Jesus has for us and is burdened by the lack of love we who claim Jesus' name demonstrate to the most vulnerable. Costly hope chooses to see the darkness and works to believe in and demonstrate light anyways. Costly hope involves coming in close as Jesus does and believing that Jesus accompanies us through the work of the Spirit, teaching, transforming, and directing us toward action for the benefit of others. One scholar put it this way: our message is a person. God takes the initiative, for God becomes flesh. God enters our world bearing truth and grace in order to transform whoever will receive God. Transformation is not an inspired human work. It is divine work through and through. And God invites us into God's work. God shows us what it means to live in a neighborhood and to embrace costly hope. Lauren Isley wrote a story called The Star Thrower, and it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking the beach before he started. One day, as he was walking along the shore, he saw a figure, and it was down the beach and moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself at the thought of someone who would dance to the day, so he walked faster to catch up. As he got closer, he noticed that the figure was that of a young man, and that what he was doing was not dancing at all. The young man was reaching down to the shore, picking up small objects and throwing them into the ocean. The wise man came closer still and said, "Good morning. May I ask what it is that you're doing?" The young man paused, looked up, and replied, "Throwing starfish into the ocean." "I must ask, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean?" asked the somewhat startled wise man. To this, the young man replied, "The sun is up, and the tide is going out. And if I don't throw them in, they'll die." Upon hearing this, the wise man commented, "But young man, do you not realize that there are miles and miles of beach and starfish all along the miles? You can't possibly make a difference." At this, the young man bent down. He picked up yet another starfish, and he threw it into the ocean. As it met the water, he said, "It made a difference for that one." Living in hope these days may feel as impossible as clearing an entire beach full of starfish by yourself. But friends, we are not alone. You are not alone. A philanthropic organization called the Starfish Foundation took this story and made some adjustments to the ending. Their ending goes like this. The old man looked inquisitively and thought about what the young man had done and said. Inspired, he joined the young man in throwing starfish back into the sea. Soon others joined, and all the starfish were saved. Friends, the world is dark. Where have you felt or experienced darkness most acutely? Take a second and look around, because we all feel it. And yet there is still light to be found. Costly hope is not always comfortable, but it is real and it is honest. And when we do costly hope together, when we share stories of the darkness and the light, when we talk about our grief and our joy, when we sit with one another, when we know others and allow others to know us, when we recognize the light that is shining and allow the light to draw us into connection with our neighbors who are having a hard time seeing anything aside from darkness. When we embrace costly hope, we can find sustainment through the worst kinds of situations and the worst kinds of days. Jesus exists in community with the triune God, and we as a community of faith are brought together by God for many reasons. And one of those is so that we can hope together. When we do this costly hope together, starfish can be saved for miles and miles, and we can wake up the next morning and keep going. Can you feel that? Hope is here, and hope is on its way. Amen.